Fancy some winter sunshine whilst watching some English Test cricket? Gullivers Sports Travel now have on sale their options to experience the England Cricket Tour of New Zealand in December this year. Options include flights, accommodation, tickets, group dinners, and more. England play 3 tests there this winter, and if the series is anywhere near as fun as the last one, you're in for a treat. Book your spot now by either visiting their website or find the link in our notes below. Hello and welcome to the Wisden Cricket Weekly podcast. England have named their squad for the T20 World Cup. No major surprises, but with the squad's announcement, we'll have a chat about how we think the defending champions are shaping up as they go to the World Cup in the Americas. We've also got an in-depth interview with the England vice-captain, Ollie Pope, who gets as forensic as he's ever got on his technique. Plus, there's some domestic cricket chat, a bit on the IPL, and more. I'm Yas Rana, and with me today are Mark Butcher and Ben Gardner, with Ollie Pope to come later in the show. Let's start with that England squad announcement. That squad is Buttler, Moeen, Archer, who last played a professional game in May last year, Bairstow, Brooke, Sam Curran, Duckett, the uncapped Tom Hartley, Will Jacks, Chris Jordan, Liam Livingstone, Adil Rashid, Phil Salt, Reece Topley, and Mark Wood. Guess the first thing that leaps off the page is Jofra Archer is back, and that is great to see. Butch, what were your initial reactions to the squad announcement?
No surprises really. Once we heard of the injury to Jamie Overton, who is, as we've discussed on here before, being seriously considered as a bolter, as an outsider, for a sort of an all-rounder, big hitting option for England. Then it became reasonably obvious that Chris Jordan's name would appear on the team sheet, having had a really good winter in Pakistan and various franchise leagues, bowling well at the death, and perhaps more importantly, as far as England's batting depth is concerned, really having a very high strike rate, sending the ball out of the park, and adding to the notion that England will be able to keep their foot on the pedal from ball one, by dint of the fact that they'll be able to bat all the way down to Adil Rashid at number 11. So it's pretty much the way that England were successful in winning the last World Cup in Australia in terms of the batting is concerned. And of course, the great news, as you've already mentioned, is that Jofra Archer comes back, which suddenly adds, all being well, fingers crossed and touching as much wood as possible, adds a bit of bite, a bit of spite, and a bit of fear factor to the bowling attack should he make it through the matches against Pakistan in May. So it's an enviable squad, it really is. And I guess in terms of the personnel, I don't think anybody can argue really with the names and the players that are available. The one thing I guess to look at, and I'm sure we'll talk about, is kind of how England line up with the bat. Because basically if you're an opener, or if you're not an opener in your T20 career, then you've got no chance of being in the team. That in itself throws up one or two issues about perhaps how England might decide to line up. We know about flexibility in T20 lineups and how important that is, but it's also incredibly important not only to have dangerous players for the power play and going out there and attacking the new ball, but it's incredibly important in tournament play to have people who are cold enough to finish off games when things haven't gone exactly as you would have liked them to do at the top. And that's the one area I think where you'd look at England and go, okay, who plays the Ben Stokes role in getting the team over the line, when basically, with the exception perhaps of Harry Brook, that the rest of the batting lineup are much more attuned to and best at going out in the opening stages when the ball is new and the field's up.
In some ways, Ben, the squad selected is very similar to the squad picked 2 years ago for when England, let's not forget, won the T20 World Cup. But there also are some crucial differences. And Ben Stokes, not available for this T20 World Cup, although he plays very little T20 cricket, he actually did play a very crucial role in that tournament in, as Butch says, being that cold-blooded killer at number 3 and just sort of guiding England through chases they should get to, but were by no means guaranteed to get to. It feels like, even though there's nothing hugely up for debate in terms of the squad that's selected, it's quite hard to work out actually how that lower middle order actually looks on paper, because you have all those all-rounders that contribute to the batting depth, but there's almost so many of them that they don't have as much responsibility as most middle orders have.
Yeah, in some ways I think that's actually a strength of the squad. Like thinking back to the World Cup squad, the ODI World Cup squad that was picked, that felt like England had sort of like a first 11 in mind and then backups for the players. And then that meant that actually you didn't have as much flexibility in terms of if you wanted a different balance of the side, or if you wanted, to leave someone out for form or that, or what have you. Whereas in this squad, I think England have especially, that top five, Duckett, it seems like the reserve in there. Apart from that, it seems pretty much locked. Below that,
so that's Salt, Butler, Jacks, Bairstow, and Rob Key confirmed that Bairstow's going to bat 4 and Brook at 5.
Yeah, and I guess the one thing to say about that, just quickly, is that that's 5 right-handers, right? So you might possibly see that's where Duckett might come in possibly later in the tournament if there is a bit of England being targeted by left arm spin maybe, or you might even see Sam Curran's been basically batting number 4 in the IPL. There might be the odd promotion for him to take on a spinner. Obviously, Monan can do that as well. But yeah, in that lower middle order, I think it's a strength of the squad that you can go fully batting heavy with, Moeen, Curran, Livingston, and then even if you pick Jordan and Hartley, then actually that's crazy batting depth. It's interesting talking about the fact, thinking about there's no surprises. I think partly that's just because of how much of this has been kind of trailed in advance. Like if we'd been sitting here not knowing anything and Jamie Overton, say, had been in the squad as he almost would have been, we'd have been like, oh, hold on. And then you look at his record and be like, no, it does make sense, but he would have come in from nowhere. Tom Hartley has come in a bit from nowhere. And I think people might think, oh, have they just done this because he bowled quite well on the Tour of India? And it's absolutely not that, I think. Like, he, as a finger spinner in the Blast and in the 100 as well, has been just a very reliable, sort of accurate left arm tall finger spinner, and his accuracy at sometimes on that India tour, he was better when conditions were really helpful, and when he needed to keep the runs down, that was where he was found a bit more wanting. But actually that's a strength of his in T20 cricket. I think he's a canny pick for his white ball credentials rather than because he's shown in international cricket. So yeah, I like the squad because there's lots of options, lots of things they can do. And the bit that's not flexible is that's less flexible, that top 5. But you look at that top 4, and one of them's the leading overseas run scorer in the IPL, and the 3 others have all made an unbelievable 100 chasing in the past few weeks in the IPL. So that is a high caliber lineup.
I think that Bairstow's sort of recent 100, which is just like Johnny, just at the point where you're sort of thinking, well, crikey, there were calls for bringing him home and all the rest of it. But I do think that Bairstow and the point around about not having any left-handers in that top 5 does mean that I don't think that it should be 100% nailed on that Johnny Bairstow gets in that top 5 and that Ben Duckett has a real chance of forcing his way in there at his expense. There were 1 or 2 rumblings and issues around sort of Johnny during the 50 over World Cup, and that people weren't wildly enamoured with him around the dressing room while things weren't going particularly well. And Duckett himself is in fabulous form and does offer you that slightly different way of playing, particularly on what we expect to be slow, low surfaces in the Caribbean. And so Ben Duckett's name definitely should not be written off as just being a spare batter. I think as a middle order player, with all of the options that he has against the slower bowlers, that he's certainly one that they're keeping a very, very close eye on, perhaps to make it into that top 5.
Just on conditions, you watched a lot of cricket out in the Caribbean in the last few years. A lot of chat about how this World Cup's in the Caribbean and the USA, not for England. They are only playing in the Caribbean. What should we expect from Caribbean pitches?
Well, I mean, they're a lot slower than they used to be. That's well documented fact. With perhaps the exception of even Barbados hasn't been as quick as before. St Lucia is perhaps the quickest pitch down there regularly now. And the grounds are small. We've seen what's been happening out in India, and the way that the bat has very much dominated the ball. And squads will be looking to have heavy hitters in them. The old adage that the team that hits more sixes wins could not be more stark than when you're playing in the Caribbean on what can be very, very tiny little boundaries. So, I mean, that's basically what I expect. I think the spinners will play a pretty big part. One thing that England relied on very heavily in the win in Australia was the fact that the dimensions of the grounds were so big. So Sam Curran and his slower balls and slower ball bounces and hitting the middle of the pitch, with field set square was very much very much something that was successful for England. Ironically, it was very successful for England in the Caribbean the first time they won it under Paul Collingwood. But I do think that sort of ball striking and the way that batters sit back and look for that now, particularly with the boundaries being so small, is something that is not something you can hang your hat on as a tactic as far as a bowling unit is concerned. So, the ball should be flying. And people who play spin well and have batters in the middle to lower order that really can take advantage of those small boundaries are going to be very successful.
I know a lot of people talk about how there are too many T20 World Cups. It's been fewer than 18 months since the last one. But the one thing that just about makes it okay for me is that we see such variance in conditions from one tournament to the next, because that ball you were talking about that Sam Curran took a lot of wickets with in 2022, that is going for 6 when exactly the same thing happens in the Caribbean, just because the playing areas are so much smaller. So that is like a very fun thing to look for a World Cup in totally different conditions.
Yeah, and last time it followed on so quickly from the last one because they had to delay the tournament from 2020, so you had back-to-back years. This time as well with an ODI World Cup in between, it feels like the focus has gone away from T20 World Cups for a bit, from T20 cricket, and now it's back on it. So this doesn't feel like it's come so soon after next one, and especially because it's not, also because the defending champions had such a stinker in the ODI World Cup, there's also a bit more intrigue there from that point of view. Yeah, I'm just from a general tournament point of view, I'm really interested and excited. May well be for some great Indian players their last chance to win a World Cup trophy. Some of them have won one before, but for them to be the main men as that happens, this could be the last chance for that. And also just hard to pick a clear favourite. England, that batting depth is a big strength of theirs, but equally there are weaknesses you can pick in that side. On the bowling side, they're sort of backing a few things that are, Jacks doesn't have a load of international experience. Salt's sort of ascension to becoming a properly elite batter is quite recent, and that will be tested. The bowling attack, Archer, there's a lot resting on him, coming back to his best straight away, and then beyond him there are certain frailties there. So it's not as if they are an absolutely world dominating side, but I don't think you can say that for anyone. So I think it's just an interesting tournament from that point of view as well.
Another big thing that I'm really looking forward to is seeing sort of cricket being a focus in the Caribbean again. With a bit of luck, there'll be a lot of travelling support for all the teams. The new dimension with the New York. What's the other one? It's Florida, isn't it?
New York, Texas, Florida.
Yeah. New dimension with that sort of coming on board as well means that it's going to be really exciting, and I just really hope that the Caribbean, the West Indian public gets out and supports it in huge numbers as well, and we see that sort of carnival atmosphere at the grounds, which will be fantastic.
Just going over a few selection decisions England made. So the only player who's been dropped, I guess, from the T20 World Cup final 11 18 months ago is Chris Woakes. But I guess even then, he was only in that side because Reece Topley was injured earlier in the tournament. And just on Tom Hartley, he's been picked ahead of Rahan Ahmed, who played 4 of the 5 games out in the Caribbean in December last year. Rahan was quite expensive in that series rather. And I guess Hartley gives England something they don't currently have in the squad. They don't have a left-arm spinner. And his batting, as we know, is more than decent. And I guess the other one, we got a question in specifically on Gus Atkinson. Richard asks, why pull Atkinson out of the IPL so he's ready for the World T20 and then not pick him? He spent the winter carrying drinks, been rested for a championship match and now not picked. It's not logical. He should have been playing in the IPL for the experience. I guess I don't think Atkinson was pulled out of the IPL so that he was ready for the World T20. First of all, he was at KKR very much as the substitute overseas player for Mitchell Starc. I know it hasn't gone well for Mitchell Starc, but the plan was never for Atkinson to play that much out there. And also, Rob Key, a couple of times already this summer, has mentioned Atkinson's name as a test prospect. I know he didn't play in that series in India, but Atkinson's come back. He's played county championship cricket. He was probably going to be in the bench in India if he went out there. And he's done really well for Surrey, bowling in the sort of role that England might look to use him in the summer. So I think actually how England have managed Atkinson for these 2 months is pretty much fine.
Yeah, and Jofra's reappearance has has put him on the back burner. And with with the injury records of both Archer and Reece Topley, you would suggest that both Chris Woakes and Gus Atkinson stayed ready. That's the kind of the reality of it all. And Gus is going to play a major part, you would think, for England in the next couple of years in the lead up to the Ashes in whatever formats, and England hoping in the red ball format that he really comes to the fore.
Just on how those English guys are going in the IPL, worth running through exactly what they've done over the last week. So Phil Salt is the leading overseas run scorer in the IPL, and he's doing that at a strike rate of 180. Him and Sunil Narine are scoring at over 12 runs and over as a pair, which is the second highest run rate for an opening partnership in any T20 competition ever. In the list of the top 16 fastest scoring partnerships in T20 cricket, Salt is in 6 of them. Butler has 2 centuries this IPL, and it still doesn't really feel like he's at his best. Johnny Bairstow, as we mentioned earlier, hit 108 off 48 as Punjab had that record chase of 262, so the highest ever successful run chase in the history of T20 cricket. Bairstow scoring 100 there. And then on Sunday, Will Jack scored a 41-ball ton, hitting Rashid Khan for 28 in an over, going from 50 to 100 in 10 balls. So 2 overs from the match's finish. Jacks was on 44. There were only 12 balls left in the game, and he ends it with 100. Yeah. He went 4-6-6-2-6-4-6-6-4-6-6. Those last 5 deliveries were off Rashid Khan, which sounds quite good.
And he still doesn't have any sort of England contract.
No, he still doesn't have an England contract. Rich asks, simple question: what's Moeen's role?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? We're sort of going to go back to it again. That sort of cold-eyed finisher of an innings in a run chase is if he plays, that's potentially going to be the position that he walks to the crease in. 6-7. Where games are sort of won and lost, and as has been again mentioned time and time again on this podcast, it's not a role that he does particularly well, if at all. And so I don't know, but when I was sort of writing down sort of 15 names for the squad on Sunday before it was announced on Monday, I was kind of ignoring Moeen. For some reason, I got it into my head that he walked away from playing for international cricket, but of course that's only in test matches. And I couldn't think of somebody that would then fit in the role as a sort of a spin bowler that might give you 2 or 3 given the conditions, who also sort of cleared the ropes with any sort of regularity, or was a terrific ball striker. And so therefore, he kind of gets picked by default, not because he's absolutely the man. He gets picked because there is nobody else really that is pushing him to take that place. I would be surprised. I would be surprised if somebody like Livingston is in decent form, and Sam Curran sort of regains some of that confidence, etc. If Moeen gets into the team, that's what I think. I think he's there for experience, for his experience, not to gain experience, and to step in should there be any issues around that. Because I just don't think, even if you take it from the point of view that that you might throw him in, he might be listed at 7 or 8 or whatever, but then you might throw him up the order to get a left-hander up against left-arm spin or whatever it might be. I still think that you're better off picking Duckett over Bairstow than doing that, and packing the rest of the 11 with either specialist bowling or batters who are simply more reliable in that situation. So he plays. I hope it goes incredibly well. But the sort of the portents are that given the role that he is normally given in an England team, he kind of doesn't fulfill it. And so therefore, England might well ignore him altogether.
It's quite interesting though. In 2022, Moeen played pretty much every game of England World Cup and didn't really have to do that much. Yeah. He was sort of batting lower middle order and bowling one over here or there. And I know that we didn't mention it when we talked about Jordan, but Moeen and Jordan are 2 figures who are just really respected by this England setup, this England management. And I think, Ben, if we compare England to other squads in the tournament, I know they're not all been announced yet, but we can have a pretty good guess at what we're likely to see. England just have so much more all-round depth than everyone else. We're so used to seeing T20 tournaments where squads are constructed from drafts and auctions, where you can pinpoint exactly where your deficiencies are in squad composition and you make up for it. Everyone sort of bats deep in franchise cricket. That's not necessarily the case in international cricket. You know, in the T20 World Cup just gone, India had Ashwin batting at 7 in the semi-final against England. Ashwin would have batted 11 for England if he was an England sign-up. There's such a difference there, and even though Moeen doesn't actually, he might not have to do anything again. But there is.
It's also it gives you a sense of comfort and well-being, knowing that you have players of that ability, down the list, and it perhaps plays into the attitude of the batters that go in before him. And there's no doubt that was something that Owen Morgan was always incredibly keen on. Because if you want it's all very well saying go out and play with freedom, but if you don't bat below 6 or 7, then the tendency is that you're going to just hold back a little bit because you can't afford to be 4 down.
Yeah.
With England, that isn't necessarily the case. Although in the 50-over tournament,
Well, I was just going to say that actually, I think if you compare the two white ball formats, you can sort of fudge your bowling a little bit more in T20 cricket. So, like in 2022, for example, Ben Stokes, England were very smart about how they used his bowling. He'd bowl the first over, he'd bowl the 7th over, the 2 overs where statistically the fewest runs are scored. To sort of get through 20 overs. You can't really do that with a bowler in 50 over cricket. You can't really say to a 6th bowler, go on bowl 10.
Yeah.
You can sort of do it. And if you have so many bowling options, you're not actually expecting that much from individuals, which is a thing England toyed with in the 50 over World Cup, but didn't really get right.
Yeah. And just on Moeen's role, it's kind of insurance policy, but he did play a vital innings in that final in 2022, right? Like he comes in England with 80 for 4 and hits 19 off 13, which obviously, it's 19 off 13, but that got them basically to the winning line. I think that's the thing of him versus another sort of like luxury type player, is he has just won so many games and so many tournaments. I mean, sometimes you think of him not as that cold hard killer, but also he's not going to be nervous in those moments. He might play the wrong shot, but he's not going to be fazed by the occasion, I think, which is a real strength.
Yeah, I guess, to qualify that, he has been in winning teams and winning 11s. I wouldn't say that he has won games. Just the difference, I suppose, in terms of my view on that is he there at the end, having seen the team home, and that, I mean, we looked into it, didn't we? It just never happened.
Yeah.
So but I completely get it. I understand, and as I've said, I couldn't think of anybody else that would say, this is me. That's the role that I deserve to have, and therefore England have an incredibly experienced player in that squad, and therefore he deserves to be there.
Next up, a chat with Ollie Pope. So this was good fun. So I went down to the Grey Nichols factory in Sussex for this, and we basically just spent 30 minutes talking about batting and batting only. So we talked about how his game has evolved over the years. There's some off stump guard chat. We talked about how his stance has changed over since his England debut back in 2018 to what it looks like now. We talked about the good and the bad from his tour of India. Here is that chat. So we're here at the Grey Nichols factory, Ollie. I'm fascinated. How do you go about choosing your bats?
Yeah, so for the last probably 4 years now, I've always used a shorter blade with a normal length handle. I just feel like it picks up a bit lighter, and that's something that you're seeing quite a lot now. Quite a few guys in the changing room do that, and then gradually just tinker. Sometimes you might score runs and score 100 or a couple of big innings, and then with one specific bat, and then you'll just like the feel of it, and then you'll go, right, this is my template. This is what I want. I want this curve in it. I want this weight in it. I want this kind of handle. But that can change the whole time. Like at the minute, I just like mine slightly more rounded, fairly light, not too bulky, but still enough behind it. And then it's like I said, it's constantly changing, but you just get a feel for one bat. It's not always the one that pings the best for me, especially in red ball cricket. It's just the one that feels right in my hands.
So we're going to talk technique. As a club cricketer, I'm always interested in how much do pros talk about technique in the dressing room. And as a batter, when you make changes to your game, is that something that you are having thoughts about in the nets, or do you make changes based on conversations with coaches? So what is the evolution of a batter like?
Yeah, you see it with a lot of different players. Like I think someone like Joe Root's the perfect example. He's constantly making tiny adjustments to his game, but with keeping the same basics. And I think that's something batters learn along the way. You want to. It's easy to look up to your idols and look up to the guys you've grown up watching and be like, I want to bat like him. But you need your own template. What works for Ollie Pope, not what works for someone else. So constantly tinkering. I think it can change slightly from where you go. For example, in India, I mean, the perfect example is I spent. I was injured obviously before India for 3 months. I was netting, training for my trigger for reverse swing bowling, trying to stay a little more open, and then suddenly got out in the game. And what I'd been doing for 3 months before, I ended up just going with this new trigger because it just felt right in the game. And that was the innings that I had a bit of success in. So I think that
was mid-innings. So you were preparing for something for 3 months, and then mid-innings you worked out that wasn't quite working.
Not even mid-innings. I think might have been one ball, and I think Bismah was bowling reverse swing and Siraj had it reversing. So I was like, right, I'm just going to trigger with my back leg, keep my left leg out of the way. And it's like, just shows that sometimes there's an element of just feel in the game, but it's very rare for me. So at the same time, so then I kind of got back to England, and for example, I was like, is this the way for me to go? And then being honest, like it's not, it doesn't work for me in England. I played one county game last week. I got out once doing it, and I immediately know I need to just go back to the way that I've playing, which is a normal 2-legged trigger, nice and simple. I get my sort of weight and my balance a little bit better there. I can move forward and back a bit better. So you're constantly wanting to get better. I did that because I was cautious of reverse swing and your pads and your stumps, and it's never going to be easy out there. I think there's a good video or picture going around of me with my 2 stumps on the floor, so it doesn't always work. But at the same time, it's just trying to realize what's the biggest risk. In India, that was the case. So that was my work on. And then in England, it's slightly different. It might be a bit more swing, a bit more nip. So it's trying to work out what's best for me here. So I like to just try and do all my work well away from the cricket in an ideal world, do it for 2 or 3 weeks before, and then come the game, then you know exactly how you're going to go into it. And you don't really want to be thinking about your technique in these big games. You'd rather just have a clear mind and just go in and play the situation, not just where my feet, where my head, where my hands.
So I've got 2 stills. One of you at Lords in your test debut against India in 2018, and then one against Australia also at Lords last summer. Talk me through the changes here. So looking at the one from your test debut, you're slightly more offside. I think the other notable thing is you're more crouched back in 2018 compared to where you were last summer. Talk me through those changes and when do those changes take place, etc., etc.
Yeah, I think so. I'm actually the legs, the sort of bend in the legs. I realised I was just getting too tense in my legs. I wasn't moving smoothly enough. I wasn't sort of getting enough power and just too crouched down, and it just brought too much like tension within my body. So I reckon probably after I got dropped from the England team after a couple of games for the first time, that was when I realised that I needed to try and change that. So gradually, I think I probably made that adjustment probably over the next few months after getting dropped. And also that's not perfect. I mean, that's probably when I got bowled as well, actually. But I'm trying to just keep my head a little bit more that way. I mean, if you look at where my balance is there, it just looks like I'm falling over to the offside, and that's just going to basically mean my back can't come down in a nice straight line. But this is I know whether it was the ball I got bowled.
It wasn't actually.
But that's a much better position. I mean, the reason I got bowled was because I saw a wobble seam ball coming down, but it swung in when I didn't expect it to swing. So that is the reason I got in a bad position. But that's a better position for me now because my balance is just much better. And I think other examples will be used as well when I'm over the wicket and my balance will be in a better position. And then I think the 2 things for me that I'm worried, well, probably 3 things are my head, my hands. I want to have a nice clear back path where it's nice and simple. When you hit a straight drive or a cover drive, it just looks like almost gravity's taken over and it's just all moving kind of in one line. And also I want my feet, so for the left arm seamer, I want to be just slightly open like that. And then for a right armer, pretty much parallel towards the bowler. So that's kind of what works for me when I'm playing my best. Things look pretty simple that way, and that's sort of my template of how I want it to look. So yeah, nice and simple with the head, hands, but again, still kind of things that I work on. And and things that you can keep improving, and just trying to sort of find drills to help improve that.
So what are the drills that are your go-tos?
Yeah, so I'll do each morning. I like to just do some basic stuff every morning of the game. I don't necessarily hit with a sidearm. I'll just get my pads and gloves and a box, and just get some throws and just hit some nice defences, because I think it's easy in the season. We're constantly playing, especially in the county season, and then going into the test summer. And actually now with T20 and the 100 kicking about, it's good just for me as a test cricketer, it's good for me just to keep nailing my basics. So I'll just block a load of balls for 5 minutes, and then hit a few drives where I try and hit sort of extra cover, and then I'll clip a few and hit a few on drives as well. And that's just a good way. It's pretty easy to do. Like I'm expecting to middle most of these balls, and it's something that keeps it nice and simple in the morning, and it just keeps my focus basically just my head position, and just being clear with my footwork and precise with my footwork as well.
A couple of years, is it 2 years ago now or 3 years ago, the off-stump guard was almost a national culture war issue. So you were batting on off-stump then. What was your thinking behind it, and why did you move back to a more middle stump?
Yeah, I think so. I realised my weakness then was probably that sort of fifth stump channel, and nicking balls on that fifth stump channel, because my hands were getting too pushy at it. So my theory behind it then was, right, if I shuffle across a bit, and I know if I'm on off stump and the ball's pretty not hitting my legs, then I can leave the ball easier. And then, and because I was good off my pads, and so that was the theory behind it. And then I kind of, when I got dropped from England, got after the Ashes series away, came back and worked on my game, had a long chat with Vikram Solanki, who was the head coach at Surrey at the time, and we're like, right, well, just stick with one thing, because at that time I was just tinkering, and that wasn't the right thing for me to do. So I was like, right, I'll stick to batting on middle. I might trigger just to middling off, but then that, as long as you can know where your off stump is, I think that can then solve those problems. And I'm not saying it was definitely the right or wrong thing to be standing on off stump at the time. I got out, Southey got me out once LBW, so it looked like the wrong thing. But yeah, I think that there's always a thought behind it. It's not just, I'll stand on off stump and just clip everything off my legs. It's like, right, how can I negate my weakness? But then again, one of my biggest strengths is playing through the offside. So it's not getting too wound up in how they're going to get you out, but it's actually trying to work out how you can score runs. So I cut and I play my cover drives, and then if I can just keep learning where my off stump is, I can leave those balls on fifth stump a lot better. So that was the theory behind it. Somewhere like Australia might happen a bit more because a lot of the balls are bouncing over the stumps, but I think for now, what's worked best over the last few years is me just standing on middle, triggering sort of to middle and off, and I mean, we're talking about margins of an inch, so but they do make a difference, and in your mindset with how you want to go about an innings.
As you played more test cricket, did you make technical changes based on the different challenges? So Rob Key talks about it a lot, that you have more 90-mile-per-hour bowling, you have taller bowlers, generally more bouncing pitches as well. Was there anything that you did almost specifically for the challenges that you get in test cricket, and do you even set up now slightly different in test cricket versus county championship stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. I think with quicker bowlers, so I worked out I was getting slightly hurried on the short ball. So I try and pick my hands up a bit more, which helps me in probably more test cricket, if I'm being honest. And that can help me just get onto the pull shot quicker. And then if you think about it, if your hands are low when the bowler's releasing the ball, and it's a weird concept, but if you've got to go up and then back down, then you're probably going to be on the move when you're defending a little bit. So when I'm playing my best at the minute, I'm just trying to keep them fairly high. I think you see it with a lot of batters now, fairly high, and then all it's got to do, if I'm on the pull shot, then they're already set up for that, but also they've just got to come with a nice clear path back down, if that makes sense. So that's something Test cricket's probably helped me with, and sort of helped me learn my game with. And as well, in general, the pitches are slightly better in Test cricket. I mean, over the last year or two, they've been pretty good in county cricket as well, to be honest. But there's less of a challenge where the bowlers are just kind of trying to nip it in and every ball and hit your pad. There's a bit more pace and a bit more swing often, I find, in Test cricket. So a lot of time in county cricket, if I feel the ball's nipping almost like a ridiculous amount, I'll just walk down the crease and try and find a way to put the bowler under pressure and try and get outside the line. But if you're playing on good pitches, you don't really have to do that as much. But
yeah, I was going to ask that is something you do probably more than most batters coming down the ground. Is that a deliberate decision for just when it nips about, or?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of two things. It can either be to put the bowler under pressure and try and, if he's really settled in at bowling the top of the stumps, and trying to basically make his best ball into a half volley so I can score off it. And it's also if I feel like he's really challenging me, nipping it in. But at the same time, it's still something that I'm working out when's the best time to do it, because I do it well, but I've fallen into that trap a couple of times as well. So it's making sure I trust my defence. And for me, it's probably a little bit more now using it just to every now and again to put the bowler under pressure, so he knows that he can't just settle in and bowl his best ball. But at the same time, like, do I do it too early in my innings? Sometimes I've fallen into that trap once or twice, and it's just constant learning and constant playing the situation. And even chatting to a guy like Joe Root, who's done that a lot as well, is talking to him, and he's sort of worked that out, and that's why he's sort of the player he is now, because he's worked out that side of his game and when to use those kind of counter punches as well. So that's something I'm definitely still working on.
People always call back to hundreds, but I think some of your most memorable innings on home soil in particular actually are, I think back to, you got a 60, 70 odd against Pakistan when they had Shaheen and Naseem, and then a 70 odd at Lords against South Africa in a game that England didn't do very well in. When your game is going well against the proper quicks, I think Nortje and Rabada were playing that South Africa game, what do you think is working particularly well for you?
Yeah, I think probably that South Africa series was probably the best. I know I didn't get, like you said, I didn't get those hundreds, and then I think I made a 60 odd at the Oval as well in a very low scoring game. And I think when I was just clear in my mindset, I was happy to every now and again run down to Nortje and Rabada, which
what's that like?
I mean, if you pick the wrong ball, you could be cleaned up, which isn't ideal. And I didn't have loads of success against it. But again, I was just trying to, because I knew the pitch was doing a fair bit, I was trying to just find a way to put their best ball, which is at the top of the stumps, where they, on a grassy pitch, if they're bowling short at me, don't get me wrong, it's not that fun, but I feel like I can score off it. So it's just a way of me trying to put them under a little bit more pressure. So they're, other than obviously we lost at Lords, one at the Oval, but they're probably two of my best knocks in the England shirt, because I was so clear in my mindset there, and I trusted my defence. I left well, but I also scored at a pretty quick rate. It's almost like you're defending as least balls as possible, because you're either leaving it or trying to score off it. So still I made really good decisions in those two innings. And it was just nice and simple. I think when I'm playing my best as well, I kind of just take the pitch out of the situation as well. I know at my best I can be a good enough player to score on any kind of wicket, but it's just trying to be at your best as much as you can, because there's other times where you get on a flat one and you're out of rhythm, and it's like, geez, this is tough work. So it's just having confidence and having clarity in your game, and the sort of work you do before the week of a test match, or even the month before a test series, and so you can kind of go in full of confidence. And if there's a pitch that looks pretty spicy and seamer friendly, then you can still back yourself to do well on it.
I've got to ask you about one of your hundreds, 196 at Hyderabad. Joe Root, who's scored a few big tons in Asia, described it as one of the best knocks ever played in Asia. I spoke to Ollie Robinson afterwards, and he was talking about the preparation you guys had for that tour, and in particular what you were doing in preparation for the pitches that would turn more. And that Hyderabad pitch arguably spun more than any of the other grounds that you guys played at. Talk us through your prep for that innings.
Yeah, I think I had so much clarity in my innings, and probably the frustrating reason why I didn't kick on was because I probably set up, like you said, that was probably the biggest turner of them all, and I probably set up my whole game thinking every pitch was going to be like that. So yeah, we went out to Abu Dhabi, obviously, and then I think the best thing about, I know there was a lot of chat in the media about it, but we were able to create our own scenarios, game scenarios. We were allowed to put sand on the wicket and get guys like all our spinners, Hartley, Leachy, Bash bowling with a pitch covered in sand, so some balls were skid on, and just like that pitch did. So I had so much clarity, and I remember obviously we got one in the first innings, and I was kind of at peace with it, because in my mind I was like, right, if Jadeja nicks me off or beats me on the outside, then you've got to be at peace with that, and that's why I was sort of proud of myself in that game, was that I sort of drew a line under that, and I stuck by the same thing. I was like, right, I'm going to do everything I can to cover my inside edge and get in a good enough position that if he does spin it past me, I'm not pushing at it, hopefully to slip. So, and he beat me probably 100 times or whatever during that innings. But
and a big part of that innings was putting those balls away.
Yeah.
Like, there's nothing you can do about them.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
don't worry about them.
Yeah, and that was probably what I'd really prepared myself for, was right, see it go past the bat, see it go past the bat, and then throw the odd punch with a sweep or reverse sweep or run down the wicket. So I think it was just a clarity in my mind, and I think that's why probably the frustrating thing, like I said, was that about the rest of the series was the conditions changed a fair bit. My sweeping game and my and that kind of thing was kind of taken out of it because we played on more up and down pitches and sort of crack pitches. They weren't easy to bat on, and against someone like Bismah it never is. But that was probably why I didn't have the success I wanted throughout the whole series, was because I'd been so sort of good at preparing for a real turner, but probably let myself down a little bit just by not sort of putting enough pressure back on the bowler when we got on slightly better wickets.
On the 196, talk me through the scoop of your head. You had Gavaskar purring in the commentary box. I think it's a shot I don't think anyone's ever played before in a test match.
Yeah, I remember facing, again, that Abu Dhabi trip, I was facing Tommy Hartley. He was bowling really nicely with a new ball, and I was finding it quite hard to sweep and quite hard to reverse sweep. So I remember Brendan McCullum was standing at slip, and he's not the tallest. So I was like, you know what, I can. So I just tried it 2 or 3 times in Abu Dhabi, and I was like, oh, right, that works. And then, so I don't know what made me try it in India. And then I just remembered, I think when I'm playing my best, I'm just thinking quite logically. I'm not thinking technically. I'm like, right, there's a gap there. Feels like a fairly safe shot. And every time I played it, fortunately, it actually went for 4. So it's like, right, that was a good option to take, and use sort of my logical half of my brain and rather than my technical part. And yeah, that one worked. And again, frustrating, I didn't almost play it more during as the series went on, because it's kind of like, I didn't trust the bounce of the pitches so much. But you got to take those risks sometimes, I think.
You talked about the rest of your series. Some commentators describe the way you start an innings as frenetic. Do you think that comment is fair? And are you someone who constantly tries to start innings in a busy manner?
Not constantly. I think on the pitches, like I said, on those kind of pitches that I expected us playing on, I knew that sometimes if you're just sort of kind of sitting there, there could be one with your name on it. So my thing was, I was trying to find a way to put some pressure back on the bowler. And annoyingly, in the last test, I think I got 20 and 11, I think. But I actually felt like I started my innings exactly how I wanted to start it, and I was kind of learning on the job a little bit, because it's something that I've worked on in England. I've worked hard at my game starting my innings in England, and that word frenetic, I mean, when I do well, they call it busy. When I get out, it's frenetic. So it's like, it's just sort of how it looks. And for me, of course, it's something I can work on. Definitely the first 20 balls of my innings. And that's probably just trusting my defence, to be honest, which I should have done more so in those last couple of games. So it sometimes works, it sometimes doesn't. But for me, it's trying to work out how I can make it work a lot more times than it doesn't.
And is that one of the challenges of Test cricket in particular, is that there are 5 tests in these big series, and you actually have to adapt mid-series?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think especially with that Indian team, I think when teams come to England, you know roughly what they're going to throw at you. But I mean, credit to India, they come at you with, I mean, the way Bumrah bowled was, I mean, that's probably the toughest on pretty spinner friendly and some of the pitches batter friendly wickets. The way he bowled was very impressive, and that's another dimension. Then the way Kuldeep came in and he bowled was very impressive as well. And then they've obviously got the skills of Ashwin, Jadeja, so that you've almost got to prepare for 3 times as much as you do in a series in England, and especially in a 5-match series, because there's so many different ways they're trying to get you out. And it kind of felt like every time you had a little brain slip and you lost focus for that one ball, that was the ball they're out, because they're keeping so many dismissals in play. So that's what it felt like, and you've got to be on your A game throughout the whole thing, I think, in India, and probably slightly different to other series, because you know roughly what the conditions are going to be like and how they're going to line up, and they're going to probably play 1 spinner and 4 seamers in a lot of places. So I think that's definitely part of it. Yeah.
Finally, a non-batting question. A lot of the guys in the England dressing room now describe you as a leader. and you're given the vice captaincy at a relatively young age. How do you think you've developed into a leader, and do you have people that you've looked up to as role models in leadership?
I think part of it sort of just comes naturally to you and who you are on a pitch. I think I know what works well for me is just immersing myself in the whole game. I'm not just a batter. I want to be a good fielder. I want to help out the captain when I can, if it's my place to help him out. And then I think, as I think obviously I've really enjoyed working under Stokes and McCullum, and they've given me confidence to sort of be myself, play like I want to play. There's still a lot of work from a personal point of view that can be done, and I still feel like I can be a much better player than I am at the minute. But I feel like that leadership role sort of helps you grow within the team and within the environment. And there's always going to be a lot of noise in a test match whenever you have a low score. But I think the challenge is, for me, I think when I got that pair in India, that's probably pretty low moment. But I was like, right, I can either rock up and sort of go inside, go sort of bit insular and just worry about my own game, or actually, right, I'm vice captain here, we've got a job to do on here. So I think it's a good way of, cricket's a team sport. Like, as much as it can feel individual sometimes, it is a team sport, and you're all sort of working towards the same goal. There's going to be times where you score 0 and times where you score 100. So I think it's kind of like, you need to just be as consistent as you can. And if that's you being a leader on the pitch and off the pitch, then you need to do it after scoring 100 runs or 0 runs as well. And I think that's probably the main thing for anyone who's sort of growing up and wants to be a leader within a team, is just finding that consistency. And I think, who I've looked up to, I mean, I think we've obviously got Alex Stewart at Surrey. He's been an unbelievable role model for us, obviously as a player, but as the way he sort of runs the whole setup at Surrey is, and then even playing under Burnsy, slightly different leadership styles to someone like Stokesy, but it's really good seeing how different captains operate. And I think if you can just sort of pick up snippets of that and then be your own person if it ever does land on my lap, and then that's probably my main focus.
Well, cheers for your time, Ollie. You've got to go play golf, so we'll wrap it up there. But
cheers.
Thanks a lot and best luck for the
nice
season.
One. Thank you.
Cheers, man.
Cheers.
That conversation was part of a wider coaching feature in the new Wisden Cricket Monthly, which also included insight from Adil Rashid, Heather Knight, Simon Harmer, and others.
That chat, that's just great, by the way. Like, you don't hear cricketers talk that much about technique, and often I think they don't think people want them to talk about technique. Like, you'll ask them like why they've improved in their game, and they'll say like, oh yeah, I cut out gluten and also made some changes to my batting technique. And then you try and ask about the second thing, but they think you don't want to hear about that. And I think, did you show him like a screenshot of his stance against Nortje or someone quite early on?
So I showed him split screen. I basically pretended to be Ian Ward. So I basically showed him a split screen of his stance on debut and his stance against Australia at Lords last year.
Yeah.
Got to talk through it.
And at that point, I think Pipe just clicks like, oh, okay, this guy actually wants to talk about batting. Let's get into it. It's great, yeah.
No, it's good stuff. Elsewhere in cricket this week, Surrey were the only team in the country to win. They are above Essex at the top of the Division 1 table on wickets taken. Those two teams are level on points, nearly a third of the way through the season, and have 80% of the Division 1 wins between them. There is just one Division 1 win so far this season from the bottom 8 sides.
Is it four wins in 4 rounds we've had now, isn't it? Is that
five wins? So
yeah.
Durham have won a game as well.
Yeah.
Dan Worrall was a big part of their win this week. He took 8 in the game to follow up another excellent performance from the previous week. He now has 101 wickets at 22 for Surrey. Only Morne Morkel has a better average among Surrey bowlers with 100 or more wickets this century. Butch, it is understood that he qualifies for England this time next year. He's Australia born. He's played a few ODIs for them. He's 32 now. There's an Ashes down under next winter. Could it happen?
I mean, well, we're a good season or 2 seasons away, aren't we, from that tour, and therefore anything can happen, particularly to bowlers 30 plus. But somebody that knows his way around a Kookaburra ball, somebody who you underestimate at your peril, actually, because he hits the bat a lot harder than you think. He can swing it uses the crease really well in terms of his angles. And is a proven wicket taker. So yeah, it's possible. Anything is possible at this point in terms of the Ashes. It's a long way off. What are you asking me about that for?
It is a long way off, but equally, I'm not sure it is in terms of the players outside the setup putting together streaks of form that gets them in the conversation.
No, that's true, but also I think by the time we get there, then the attack will be made up of people who are outside.
Yeah,
because there are going to be a few. You would imagine. I mean, I still can't see Jimmy doing another tour down there. Broad has just retired. So the bowling attack is going to have a very new look to it anyhow. And whether or not a 30, he'll be 33 by then. A 33-year-old former Australian bowler will make it or not. Who knows from here? But he's certainly good enough. That is for sure.
I think
as we speak right now, yes.
Yeah,
he is good enough.
I think he bowls like a proper Test match speed and length. I think he's not quick. But he bowls low 80s, bowls a really hard length, gets good players out on good pitches. I think it's obviously, it is rare that a 33-year-old bowler comes into the picture at the last minute, but you never know.
And he's certainly matured.
Yes, Ben's been waiting for this.
Given that 10 years ago he was banned for how long? For 4 domestic games in Australia for scratching a penis into a wicket that's being prepared for a grade cricket final. And those pictures out there, we'll probably put that up there on the.
You can Google Dan Worrall penis.
I tend to go with Dan Worrall graffiti if I want to find it, but
just in case, yeah.
Just in case,
there's more stuff lurking.
Don't forget the live show, by the way. There are 10 tickets left. The last time I checked this morning, it's the 9th of May, so next week. Just a stone's throw away from the Oval. Kicks off at 7 p.m. Should be good fun. We won't be recording anything, so you'll get to hear what we really think about stuff. Elsewhere in the English game, a name to look out for this summer. Rihanna McDonald-Gay, the 20-year-old seamer, has taken 12 wickets in 3 games for the South East Stars. She toured with England A over the winter and was a leading wicket taker in their series against New Zealand. She's a seamer who pitches it up and nips it both ways. Keep an eye on her this summer. She's had an incredible start to the 2024 season. Ben, we've talked on previous weeks about the IPL high scoring and the reasons behind it, etc., etc. This week's been ridiculous, as well as the Bairstow, Salt and Jack's nonsense. Jake Fraser McGurk, the Aussie, who people rate really highly, scored 87 or 27, and no one's really batting an eyelid. You think that, as well as the impact player, this tournament specifically will have an impact on how T20 cricket might be played down the line, even in different conditions?
I think certainly it's possible, and you do just see this evolution that's happened in other formats at various points, and there have been people who have suggested that T20 batting has in general been quite conservative. Like if you think, even taking away the argument for batting depth, even if you have a top 6 you can rely on, if all of them face 20 balls in an innings, you've batted through an innings. So actually, people would argue from that, like you don't need one guy who's facing 60 of the balls. And with the conditions, with the boundary sizes, but also with the impact player, you've got players who've been sort of freed up and are maybe now kind of realising what are the limits of their potentials. Because, it's not as if in lots of these games it's the impact players who are, making massive scores to get them to these things. It's that extra insurance has made them realise, actually 20 overs is almost shorter than we've been thinking it, and we can go a bit harder. I'm not saying that 260 becomes par from the T20 World Cup, but and we have seen a bit of this before, like when England chased 170 by 10 wickets against India in that semi-final. It was like, that's the kind of total that I wonder if that's just going to be like almost like a 240 total in ODIs is now, where before you'd make that like, you're in the game with this, whereas now it's like you make that and it's like, well, we chase that pretty easily inside 42 overs. And I wonder if that's what's going to become the case for 170, maybe even 180 totals, that they no longer seem like competitive. They seem actually a bit below the asking rate. Obviously, conditions and everything come into that, but I still wonder if we might be seeing a little bit of a step change, I think.
I also sort of, flipping through various highlights packages and catching up with a few games in the IPL, that there has been a dip in standard in terms of the local bowlers. I don't think that there is quite the depth and the skill in the majority of the sort of like the Indian bowling, and with 10 teams, the quality is spread a little bit thinner, and there is absolutely no question whatsoever that T20 batting continues to evolve and to get better and better. And so a combination of those things have kind of meant, and also once you get on a bit of a roll where these sort of scores are coming in, the bowlers are shell shocked, and it's sort of self perpetuating. It keeps going. Players are expecting to get bushed. But look, it'll be interesting. The conditions in the Caribbean are likely not to be quite as batter friendly as that. And from year to year, from tournament to tournament, these numbers they fluctuate anyway. It's kind of, I always get a little bit concerned about hysteria around big scores happening in India or in anywhere actually in tournaments, because sometimes you get a month where that happens, where all of the stars align and the batting conditions become extremely friendly, and they take advantage of it. And then next time round it won't be quite so simple, and the scores will come back down again, and everyone will be sort of saying, "Oh, how do we make it more exciting?" So, a little bit of perspective, please.
As you all know from the PSL last year, when there was that Rawalpindi week,
Islamabad this year, the 160 was winning your game. So it's kind of swings and roundabouts. These things occur. Freak occurrences happen, and then things will level themselves back out to normal again.
England are not the only team that have named their T20 World Cup squad today. Ben, India have named their squad. What are the headline takeaways from the India squad announcement? Yeah,
this is hot off the press. This is as we recorded. This came in. I think the biggest headline is Rinku Singh is only in the reserves, and when we're talking about players with ridiculous records in international cricket, I think he averages about 90 and strikes at about 170 in T20Is, and he's not had the best IPL, but he's in a sort of a volatile role in that finisher role, and he's still striking at 150. It's Shivam Dubé's been prepared to him. He has had a really good IPL. He also he sort of does bowl, but because of the impact player role, he actually hasn't bowled this tournament. But I guess he is there as maybe some sort of theoretical backup to
my
Pandya.
Hot take prediction, which I don't think will actually happen, but I don't think it's impossible, is no country in the world would suit having an impact player rule in international cricket more than India. I think we'll have impact player rule in the T20 World Cup after this, and given how India have gone about organisation for previous global tournaments.
I really hate it. I really do. I kind of, part of the skill of cricket is picking the right 11, picking the right team, doing the right thing at the toss. All of these things are as much a part of the game as batting, bowling and catching. And the minute you start to mess around and make it so that you can pick 12 players or 13 players and slot one in when it suits you, I think it cheapens it. I don't like it, and I hope it never happens outside of the IPL.
I pretty much agree. Ben, other than Shivam Dubé, who else we got?
So there was the wicket-keeping decision was also a tricky one. Jishesh Sharma has played quite a bit. Obviously, K. Rahul is a long-standing India player, but they've gone with Rishabh Pant and Sanju Samson in the squad. Not an indication yet of who's going to be first choice out of those two. I think Pant's, he's got his numbers look really good in the IPL. I think you could probably pick out little bits that you might think he's not as absolute best return from injury, but I suppose it's encouraging that he's still making impactful scores even without that. And Samson is he's always been like a kind of an analyst's favourite, but I think this is the first time he's put a properly big campaign together where he's kept it going throughout. So I would marginally prefer to see Samson start out of those two. And then also just Yuzvendra Chahal's back in it. He's had a really good tournament. He's also an oddity that he's the leading IPL wicket taker of all time, I think, but is yet to play a T20 World Cup game. So he might now tick that off. So I think those are the key talking points, but it's pretty much as expected. I suppose a bit of a debate also over the exactly how that top four fits in, because Jaiswal's in the squad, but it's not especially clear if it's going to be Sharma, Jaiswal, Kohli in the top three, or just Sharma, Kohli, and then Suryakumar Yadav at number 4. Number 4, and then you've got a keeper at number 5. I guess Suryakumar Yadav at number 3, the keeper at number 4, Pandya at 5, Dubé, I guess, at number 6. Those are the two ways they could go in terms of the squad construction.
So, well, a few months ago when you looked at their India's most likely top 5, top 6, and you realised, well, none of them bowl and none of them keep, which is part of the reason why Rinku Singh's missed out despite their record, is if they went on form, international form, they wouldn't have had, they'd have had to fudge a keeper in at 6 or 7 who wouldn't be there on form necessarily.
Yeah, there was always going to be a Rinku Jaiswal decision in the 11. I think it's just a surprise that Rinku's not even in the squad, but I guess they've already had one World Cup recently derailed by Hardik Pandya getting injured, so they needed some sort of light-for-light cover in the squad. But South Africa have named their squad as well. There's no Ngidi, there's no Nandre Burger, but there is the uncapped Otniel Bartman. Who is he? Why is he in?
He's in because he put in several match-winning performances for Sunrise and Eastern Cape at the death during their victorious SA20 campaign, picking up bags of wickets, 3s, 4s, and holding his nerve at the end of an innings. I'm very, very surprised that there is no Ngidi. Because of his skill with taking the pace off the ball. Obviously, huge, imposing man, capable of bowling very quickly, but his slower balls have been unreadable to a lot of batters around the world for quite some time. And you would just imagine in the conditions, perhaps that are going to face all teams in the Caribbean, that would have been a very handy asset to have. But Bartman is somebody that they have earmarked as being a closer, somebody that will close down games for them. In a role perhaps that they haven't had massive success with. I mean, even somebody as good as Kagiso Rabada has had his issues bowling at the end. You want him with the new ball. You want him to try and take 2 or 3 wickets quickly to derail the opposition in that respect. But Bartman is very much a specialist at the end.
Over in Pakistan, Gary Kirsten and Jason Gillespie have been appointed as Pakistan's head coaches. As Mahmood is the all-format number 2. Gillespie will take charge of the test side. Kirsten will take over the white ball teams. And also, Ben, big news was that Bismah Maroof, one of the legends of the Pakistan women's side, has retired at the age of 32.
Yeah, and though she sounds like a young age, but this has been a 17-year international career. She made her debut as a 15-year-old back in 2006. She's captain Pakistan loads. She's had leading... got the most caps and ODIs, leading ODI and T20I run scorer. And I guess she's a proper great Pakistan cricket, although you look back at the era and you wouldn't pick out there's not like a pinpoint success. When she came into that side in 2006, they hadn't even qualified for the previous 50 over World Cup. And since then they've been if you look at their overall results, they have been a better side than Sri Lanka, for example. They've been pretty solidly the 7th best team in the world, and she has been just such a solid, dependable part of that. Not like you sometimes get some players in the lesser nations who on their day can just win a game against one of the big sides. She hasn't been that so much, though there have been occasional stand-up performances. There was I think a 99 against South Africa in 2015 that felt like a big moment, that win. But she has been the player that ensures they don't collapse and that they get up to some sort of title and that sort of thing. And she was player of the tournament at the Asia Cup in 2012, and I think retiring at 32. She's got a young family, and she's absolutely served her time. So it's interesting as well with an era of Pakistan cricket that's kind of slightly moving aside, with obviously Sanamir gone a little while ago and Bismah Maroof as well. But I think the sense that she was but maybe also looking to move on from her. They beat New Zealand in a series last year in New Zealand, but she was left out of the side for the last game of that and then retired on the eve of a series against West Indies. You wonder if there was sort of an intimation saying, you're not in our first team plans now, so, feel free to call it, and then we can get a sort of bigger hitter in when it comes to the World Cup. But a great game. A
bit of a clash as well between herself and Nida Dar, the current captain, so that wasn't particularly a sweet relationship, but it leaves a big hole in their batting for sure, and they will be sorely tested when they come to playing. I think first game's on the 10th, is it? No, 11th of May, so not long now before they arrive.
I think next week we'll have squads for that series announced. There is a new Wisden Cricket Monthly out. Joe Harmon will talk us through it. Joe, there's a new Wisden Cricket Monthly out this week. What is in it?
So the cover story this issue is a bit different to usual. We're calling it a performance special, which is basically speaking to some of the best players in the game, some of the best coaches in the game about how they do what they do. So the idea is for people who play the game to maybe pick up some tips that they can incorporate into their own game at club level or school level, but also for people who just watch the game and want a better understanding of how it's played and the technique and practice involved to get players like, so we've spoken to, Ollie Pope, who you spoke to. Phil spoke to Heather Knight about leadership. We've got leg spin tips from Adil Rashid, off spin tips from Simon Harmer, some good stuff from Jack Russell on wicket keeping. So it's trying to unravel the mystery of some of the things that make the best people in the game so good. And I think, the Ollie Pope interview, which I think is going to be on the podcast as well, is a really good example of that, peeling away some of the layers that make it a bit of a mystery and helping the layman understand how you get to the top of the game.
Yeah, I thought that because there's a section with Alex Stewart's brother, who's a coach at not quite as well known as Alec, but a lot of the advice in that's actually really practical. So it's as well as finding out what makes the best players the best players. There's some really practical advice for club cricketers out there as well.
Yeah, I mean, his view was there's almost nothing worse than netting to get yourself ready for the new season, because you play the right shots about 5% of the time. Whereas if you go down to the nets with your mate and just do throwdowns to each other, you're much more likely to drill the things that you're going to need to do outside. Sounds a bit less fun to me, but if you want to score some runs, then maybe it's the better way to go.
What else in the magazine? There's a exclusive interview with Dean Elgar that is very interesting on a couple of levels.
Yeah, that's Mel Farrell's done that one. Mel's good at getting these guys and good at getting them to open up as well. And Elgar's certainly kind of let loose, really. He's not come out until this point that I'm aware of and talked about his sacking his South Africa's Test captain and his exit from international cricket, but he decided to let it loose with Mel, and he's upset about circumstances around it. He didn't want to be let go as captain. He didn't want to call time on his Test career. He felt like he's one of South Africa's best players, and he's very open about the discussions he had with Cricket South Africa, who didn't even want him to play that valedictory series against India. He basically forced their hand on that one. Lots of really interesting stuff. I think you'll probably be seeing a few lines from that in cricket news over the next few days and weeks as well.
Yeah, a lot of context too. I didn't know at the time when he scored that amazing 100 in the first test against India that was the context behind his loss of the captaincy. And obviously he started the season really well for his new county, Essex. What have we got from the columnists?
The columnist, really good one from Mark Ramprakash, who we get back in at the start of each new season. This is the second one of the summer. Is it summer? Spring? Cricket summer.
Today's the first nice day of the year, and it's April 30th.
And we got him to talk about the attributes which make a Test cricketer. This felt particularly relevant given Rob Key and the England setup's very clear idea about what they want in their Test side, which I think Mark makes clear that he's a bit uncomfortable with that, because he thinks Test cricketers come in all different shapes and sizes, and having this very clearly prescribed idea of what they should look like in terms of the bowlers being fast and tall and the batters being aggressive and hitting the ball hard and scoring quickly. He thinks there's a risk that they're oversimplifying that, and also brings in the Kookaburra trial and says, he says it kind of sensitively, I would say. He's not after headlines here, but he's saying, well, what would Rob Key have thought in his time as Kent captain if he felt the ECB were basically telling him how to play your cricket, to an extent which sides you should be picking, and who is worth watching and who's not worth watching in terms of England selection. So yeah, it's a strong column from Mark, who always has a really interesting, considered view on the game. It's never sensationalist, but it's I'd say this is one of his more harder hitting ones. We've also got Lawrence Booth, who sees merit in the Kookaburra trial, even if the glut of draws wasn't necessarily a thrilling start to the summer. And then Andrew Miller on Rob Key tipping Andrew Flintoff to be a future England head coach, and what that says about what's required of a coach at the very top level. Perhaps it's not technique, it's more about lived experience and having players that really want to play for you in the way that Brendan McCullum has obviously had that impact with the Test side so far. Another couple of bits, there's Rob Smythe on in combination. So we've talked about this before on the podcast, but he's using the Cricket Viz archive to go way back to reassess our view of the game and see if there's like a reappraisal to be had. And he's gone right back to the time of Bradman, which is the furthest he's gone back so far in this series. Basically looking at how Bradman could have been stopped or suppressed or muzzled is probably a better way of talking about it. I don't think anyone was going to stop Bradman in his tracks. But so he goes deep into this stuff, Rob. He's got an amazing mind and amazing attention to detail. So one line here, Bradman's average against slow bowling from the 41st ball of his innings onwards was almost 250. Take out Headley Verity from that, and it rises to a truly preposterous 462.67. He also picks out the fact that Bradman was never out to a conventional off-spinner in Test cricket.
Really?
And also looks at Bradman comparatively slightly vulnerable early in his innings. Now, he wasn't a sitting duck by any means, but actually if you compare his record early in the innings to a lot of other top players, Bradman wasn't spectacular in that facet of the game. When he got in, he was bloody hard to get out.
So interesting. So he wasn't actually that much more secure early on. It was just one, if you didn't get him early on, that was it, basically.
Yeah, Rob, slightly tongue-in-cheek, lists a long list of players who weren't as vulnerable as Bradman at the start of the Test innings, which includes Mark Elam.
Wow.
I don't think he's saying that Mark Elam was stronger at the start of his innings than Don Bradman. You can use his stats in lots of different ways, but it's really fascinating. I love this series. Rob does an amazing job at it, and it's the thing I'm most excited about coming in each month because we are rediscovering the game as he goes, which was the whole point of the feature.
And there's a really interesting piece on neurodiversity in cricket as well.
Yeah, this is one I did myself. So the background, I read a study which suggested neurodiversity was disproportionately high in elite athletes. So that might be autism, ADHD, dyspraxia, neurodiversity being an umbrella term that covers all of those. And I wanted to investigate why that might be the case and look specifically at cricket. So I've spoken to 3 cricketers, Benny Howe, Rachel Slater and Karis Pavley, who are all have ADHD, about the experience of being a professional cricketer with ADHD, some of the benefits that it brings and some of the challenges as well. Benny Howe's a really interesting example. I think most people, if you were asked the most imaginative, creative bowler in the country, he would be near the top of most people's lists. And he really puts a lot of that down to his ADHD and that he's got this mind that is always thinking. He's always working out different ways to do something. That involved a really detailed study of baseball, picking up these different slower balls, which have now become commonplace in T20. They weren't really before Benny Howe. So yeah, there's a lot there. It was a really quite challenging piece to do. I learned a lot along the way, which is always nice. And hopefully it sheds a bit of light on what it's like to be a neurodiverse cricketer. And the conclusion is that there'll be a lot more neurodiverse cricketers out there than we know, because they won't have been diagnosed or they won't talk about it publicly. But actually there's a lot to be said for the benefits that it can bring in terms of having a creative mind, a dedicated focus to the game, and positives when it comes to training, particularly through hyperfocus, which a lot of people have ADHD means that they can focus very, very clearly on a single task over a long period of time. So if you think about improving your batting in the nets, what better thing to have, really? That said, there are difficulties that come with ADHD as well, obviously, and I cover some of those in the piece too.
Oh, that's really interesting. The new magazine is out on Thursday. As always, head to the link in our description to get your hands on the latest copy. That is everything for today. Cheers, Butch. Cheers, Ben. We'll be back at the same time next week. And remember, there are still a few live show tickets to get your hands on.